Well, what we're going to talk about tonight for the next few moments is how God works through adversity in our lives, and what God can do through adversity in our lives when we face hard times, difficult times, as we yield to Him. Have you ever heard someone say, when something hard or difficult happens, they just say, well, everything happens for a reason. Or there's always some good will come out of this, you watch and see. I've heard a lot of people say that. Oftentimes I wonder, if they really grasp the full breadth of that statement. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves is that true? Is that really true? And if it's true, then how is it true? And there's a verse in the Bible that we're going to start off looking at, Romans 8:28. And it's very simple. It says, we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. All right? Some very simple things in this verse will help us to understand this concept. First of all, it says all things work together for good. So that means not just the good things, but bad things that happen, accidents that happen. That means even that something that someone else does to me intentionally to harm me. God can take that and can use that for good in my life. And the next words are they work together. And this is really key to recognize. All things work together for good. And when we realize the impact of that thought, they work together, then we'll recognize that there's not an equal equation here. This thing happened, I didn't like it, but this good thing came out of it. Sometimes we see a good thing come out of difficulty and hardship. But what this verse is saying is that in God's overall work in my life, all things considered, the good and the hard, and even the things that come at me that are intended to do harm, that God takes all of those things and puts them all together so that there is a result in my life that is good according to how God defines it here. And what that means is that we might not always be able to see the good thing that comes out of something. But we can have the confidence that whatever we're facing, whatever we're dealing with, if I yield it to God, I can leave it with God, and I can trust Him that He puts that in the mix, kind of into the mosaic of all the pieces of my life, and then I trust Him with it, that He's going to use it to bring about this good that He's talking about here. And when He says for good, it is that the long-term result will be good. It doesn't mean that the thing that happened is good in and of itself. And it does. I don't even think it means that we need to thank God for the bad things that happen. It doesn't make sense to me to thank God for sickness or to thank God for untimely death or to thank God for a financial setback. It doesn't make sense to say, well, thank you, God, for that. But what I can do is, in the midst of the pain of dealing with it, or thank God because someone gossiped about me and has damaged my reputation. I don't thank God for those things. Those are evil. But I can, in the midst of them, I can say, okay, God, I know You're bigger than all of this. And I know that somehow, as my life focuses on You, and as I forge ahead in my relationship with You, somehow this becomes just a part of the overall mosaic of my life and moves me in the direction You want me to go. And so he finally gives us this thought, and that is that it's for the good for those who love God, called according to His purpose. Okay, so the promise is to people who are the best they can, yielding their lives to God. The best they can, they're loving God. The best they can, they're saying, God, I want Your purpose in my life. It doesn't mean perfectly. None of us are perfect, and none of us yield our lives to God perfectly. But it does mean that over the long haul, the direction of my life is towards God. Even though I might meander once in a while or be stubborn and not move when I should. If you look at my life over the last season of life, you might see some zigging and some zagging, but the overall direction is towards God. It's saying here that for a person who wants to love God, and for a person who's willing to say, God, I really do want your purpose in my life. I want your purposes in my life. That God will take all of the pain and the confusion and the disappointments and the bitterness and the failures, and He will weave those into the other aspects and facets of our life. And He will actually overrule the evil that's inherent in those things and use those for good in our lives. To make us what He designed us to be, and to direct us where He wants us to be, and to enable us to become the people He wants us to be. And the simple truth is, we never find real happiness in life until we begin to go down until we begin the journey of following Christ and seeking His will for our lives. That is when there is a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives. And so what we're going to do is look at these principles in the life of Isaac, and how these principles were fulfilled in the life of Isaac. Isaac, as we shared last week, was one of the patriarchs of the nation of Israel. There were three key fathers to the nation: Abraham, and then Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, whose name eventually became Israel. And so in the time of Jesus, and even before the time of Jesus, as the centuries go on, they will refer back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and that those three men kind of encapsulated the heart of the nation of Israel. They were the fathers of the nation. Now, Abraham has died by this time, so Isaac is the man. And what we saw last week was that there was a famine in the land of Palestine. God had led Abraham to Palestine and promised Abraham he'd have a son, and that eventually his heritage, his descendants, would become as numerous as the stars in the sky, God says. And God would just say, you're going to have a lot of children. And that God was going to use that nation to bless all the nations, because that's the nation that would bring the Messiah into the world. And so now Isaac is the next link in the chain of God's promise. And he's living in Palestine, and there's this famine. And so Isaac leaves Palestine and goes to the Philistine territory of Gerar. And God had told Isaac, stay here for a while. Stay here for a season. And so Isaac stays there for a season. And as you read that story, Isaac is very successful. I mean, he was a fairly wealthy man when he got there. He inherited all of his father's wealth, as nomads would count wealth. And yet now he's prospered even more. And so Isaac is starting to settle down in Gerar. It's the only thing I can figure as I read this is Isaac's getting content living in Gerar. And he's starting to forget about Palestine and the promises and the purpose of God, and what God brought his father Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees and around and down into Palestine. Why did God bring Abraham there? Why is Isaac there? Isaac's starting to forget that. And so what we see at the very beginning of this story tonight is how God moved Isaac. My first point is this, that God uses adversity to get us moving. And God, not always, but God can use adversity to get us moving, to get us off dead center. It says, then Abimelech said to Isaac, Abimelech's the king, that was the name they gave to kings, just like Pharaoh was the king in Egypt. And he says, move away from us, you've become too powerful for us. So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. So apparently, some people felt that Isaac's presence in Gerar was becoming a threat to their security and safety. Now, some commentators maintain that Isaac could not have been a military threat to them, that there's no way he could have threatened this Philistine stronghold just with his family of nomads. But that's a possibility. However, I think it's for certain that there's political things going on, power and influence, and some of Abimelech's key people are coming to him, and they're whispering his ear about Isaac, and they're fearful.